Welcome back to Sonic Central, everyone. My name is 𝗕𝗂𝗏𝗂, and it is finally time for me to give you my thoughts on my experience with Sonic Frontiers. So I attended EGX in London yesterday, and they had a huge area full of Sonic Frontiers demos, and the lines were huge. I can't imagine what they'd be like today on the weekend. So yeah, I finally played the game, went into this feeling pretty optimistic. I have definitely been pretty excited for Sonic Frontiers. It's a whole new thing for Sonic, you know, being open world and all that. But obviously being a whole new thing can result in things not necessarily working out first time, and certain things not being fleshed out as well as they could have been. But that doesn't just apply to Sonic, that can apply to anything. What I'm trying to say is, I basically went into this thing cautiously optimistic. Sonic and open world sounds great, but it's the execution which matters. So I'm going to do my best to split this video into sections, just to make it a lot easier to hear what I have to say about, you know, specific things about the game. Nothing will be in order, I just want to touch on each aspect individually. Now, before I get started, I just want to make this clear that I did get some of my own footage. You know, we weren't told by Sega directly not to record anything there, but apparently filming wasn't actually allowed. We did get something on camera though that a lot of people have been wondering about, and I'll show it later on in the video, so make sure to stick around for that. However, I do have around 6 minutes or so of my own footage. So I started the demo up, which is a 15-minute demo by the way, or something like that. And after the 15 minutes, the game will fade to black and that's it, and then you've sort of got to get off. By the way, I played this game for about an hour in total, because once the demo is done, you were allowed to go back and play it again if you wanted to. You just had to, you know, go back in the line or whatever. This was the demo we've all seen before, you know, Sonic wakes up and hears the voice, etc. But I really liked what I heard from Roger. I think he sounds pretty good. I've never hated Roger's Sonic voice. I do think the narrative of the games he's voiced Sonic in, you know, the scripts and the direction perhaps, haven't allowed him to shine as much as he could have. I don't really know. But what I will say is, his voice in this game definitely sounds a lot more mature. And this might be because the narrative of this game is looking to be a more mature take on a Sonic plot. It's got this mysterious vibe to it, and I got that vibe from exploring around too. So personally, I think it coincides quite nicely, and I'm looking forward to hearing more of his voice when we get the full game. So overall, what I heard from Roger, good stuff so far. I really liked it. So after that first cutscene, if you turn around, there will be a cyberspace portal right behind you. So if you don't move the camera, you could miss that cyberspace stage entirely, unless you backtrack at a later time. I'm not going to talk about cyberspace right now. I will touch on that, you know, later on in the video, as I do have quite a bit to say about that. So first up, I want to get into the open zone and the gameplay and physics now, and just how that feels to play. Straight away, the game pushes quite a lot of tutorials at you, even simple things like, you know, how to move the camera, how to homing attack, basic stuff like that. It also shows you that you can in fact homing attack now without even jumping, which by the way works great. I have no real complaints about that at all. It just allows you to get straight to your target without needing to jump. You can still activate the homing attack while jumping too, by the way. Just overall, it's a welcome addition in my opinion. So after all the starting tutorial stuff, I wanted to finally get a feel of this game and how it feels to play, because in my opinion, it is obviously the most important thing. What I wanted to try first was just to see how Sonic feels to just, you know, run around. And I am pleased to say that, you know, this is how I've wanted Sonic to play for well over a decade at this point. Just being able to boost and effortlessly spin Sonic around and just feel free was honestly incredible. I can't stress this enough. You have so much control over Sonic here. He doesn't feel stiff or anything. The jumping doesn't really feel stiff either. In fact, it's pretty precise. So in case you were wondering if Sonic feels like Forces in the open zone, he doesn't. This game, in my opinion, plays much better than Forces does in almost every way. Something I didn't do during my time with this demo was modify the physics in the settings, because there are a bunch of sliders you can use which can alter how Sonic controls, such as his turning speed. But the fact that I was satisfied with how Sonic felt right from the get-go, without needing to modify anything, was really good to know. Sonic can light speed dash in this game now too. From what I can recall, it didn't tell me this through a tutorial in the open zone, but it did on a loading screen during those training things where you can practice certain moves. The light speed dash works very similar to how it does from Sonic Adventure 2 onwards. Sonic just zips through a line of rings, but you can use it on any ring, I'm pretty sure. It's not just like certain rings. It's pretty fun actually. It's just nice to have, you know, a familiar ability return. So the Psy Loop is a new ability Sonic can do in this game. At the beginning of the game, it forces you to purchase the 𝗧𝗵 from the skill tree, and I didn't check the skill tree out too much. I was more just focusing on getting through as much of the demo as possible. This ability works really good, and it works best when you're boosting, in my opinion, because obviously you cover a lot more ground a lot faster. For example, there are a few enemies at the beginning you can use it on, and boosting around them while using the 𝗧𝗵 is just a whole lot faster to do, and there's probably a lot less risk on taking damage from them. There was just something satisfying about using this ability, going around enemies with it, creating patterns and seeing the outcome. This ability definitely has some good potential, and it's going to be interesting to see, its use later on in the game. Now, one of the biggest new additions to this game is the drop dash. In order to use the drop dash, you need to double jump, then hold the jump button down, and Sonic will drop dash. At first I was thinking, I don't really see the use for this ability because I might as well just boost around because it's a whole lot faster. I didn't really see any benefit of using the drop dash at that point. And this was because I was using it on, flat surfaces and attempting to use it uphill basically. So later in the open zone, I tried it downhill, on a slope, and while it seems this ability does have good use after all, using this on a slope allows you to roll downhill and go really fast. I think it might be momentum based as there is a speedometer, and it did increase as I was rolling downhill. It also went way faster downhill than it did on, a flat surface, so there is that. It's very similar to how classic Sonic rolls downhill. Even in the classics, it's a faster option to roll downhill than, run downhill, and it works almost the same here. The drop dash is essentially the replacement for the spin dash and the roll. This option is much more ideal to go downhill when compared to running or boosting, as to be honest, I didn't see any major speed increase when running down a hill in comparison to using the drop dash. So yeah, the drop dash is a massive win in my opinion. So when you've beaten a later cyberspace level, the open zone truly does open up and you're free to go wherever you want. This is where the game really begins in my opinion, but by the time I got there in the demo, the 15 minutes were almost up every time, so I didn't get a whole lot of time to take in, the sights and explore as much as I wanted to. But this open world so far is amazing. Running around as Sonic and hearing all the ambience and seeing all the architecture and how much content there was too, it was just incredible. The music for this open zone too, I guess it's Kronos Island, just set the scene as well. It all just went together so nicely. It's almost overwhelming when you first get to the open zone because it's just so big and you don't even know where to begin. If you go on the world map, you can filter it so it shows stuff like side missions, challenges, those 𝗂𝗂 related things, cyberspace portals, and I can't quite remember what else. I do wish I managed to get all of this on camera, but I just wasn't able to. The platforming in the open zone was pretty good, but it was nothing groundbreaking or anything. There's just a lot of springs and grind rails and, those hoop things. And when you beat them, it rewards you with some collectible stuff. There is a lot of these platforming challenges. They're not bad or anything, but hopefully later on in the game they get, a bit more challenging. As, again, I didn't get a whole lot in during those 15-minute runs. But I will say during my time in the open zone, I did try and do a few of those, but I can't quite remember which ones they were specifically. I did manage to climb up that, that massive tower, which you can choose to run or climb up, which is cool because it does give you multiple choices on how you want to approach that. And I feel this is a trend that the game will keep doing, which is definitely a good thing. It really takes Sonic away from being, quite linear into something a bit more broad. I also went to find Big the Cat too, and I managed to reach him by entering this portal near a cliffside, but by the time he came on screen, the demo was up again, so I didn't really get to see a whole lot of him or the fishing minigame. So to summarize, the open zone is fantastic and the gameplay overall feels great. Sonic just feels good to play as. I did want the spin dash in the game, but to be honest, the drop dash is essentially a replacement to it, and it does work fairly similar, and it also does act as a solution for, giving Sonic his roll back. So in a way, it kind of does bring two things back into the game that have been missing for a while, or at least an acceptable alternative. I just loved running around all those, lush environments. There are loads of things to keep you busy. The music is amazing. There are enemies pretty much everywhere to keep you on guard. So far, this is definitely looking to be the best part of this game, which is quite honestly good to say, seeing as this is the new big thing Sonic team are trying. And from what I played, they've done a great job with it. The biggest flaw I found in the open zone wasn't actually anything to do with the gameplay itself. It was more of a technical issue, and that's just the awful pop-in. This has been something we've seen a dozen times in this game from the very beginning, and unfortunately it's still pretty bad. It's hard to go anywhere on this map without seeing things just randomly pop in, and it's not seamless either. It doesn't fade in or anything, it just straight up appears out of nowhere. It is a shame, but on a positive note, this is about the only technical issue or bug that I really encountered. So far, this seems to be a pretty polished game. So now we're going to get into the combat system in Sonic Frontiers, and this is a massively new thing to the Sonic series, at least for Sonic himself. He can now do things like punching and kicking, and this really comes into play when you fight the enemies in the open zone. The first enemies you fight are regular enemies, I can't remember the name for them. You'll find them quite commonly around the world, and they can easily be defeated with, the homing attack. But the first boss I fought was Ninja, and this is where the combat really started to kick in. Sonic can do things like, he can evade, he can parry, and he can do all sorts of different moves to take this enemy down. This Ninja boss was pretty fun. It was cool to evade the attack and parrying at the right time, which actually activated this slow motion thing. I can't remember what it was called, but it basically slows time down and gives you more time to get your attacks in. It kind of reminded me of, Chaos Control or something similar to that. The good thing is there's definitely depth to this combat system. However, this boss was very, very easy. It's not that big of a challenge, to be honest, and you don't really need to do a whole lot to take it down. Admittedly, it was the first major boss of this game, or the first Guardian, I guess, so there is that. I will say one of the biggest flaws I found with this combat system was the fact that once you've been attacked, you can just light speed dash the rings you've dropped. So there's no real threat of Sonic dying to these bosses. If you do that, it just feels really exploitable. To be honest, I think this needs to be taken out of the game, or at least have a system in place where, being able to light speed dash your drop rings is locked behind maybe the easy difficulty, or maybe your rings scatter further away the more you get hit. I would have personally liked to see maybe a health bar for Sonic in the open zone. So yeah, the first boss was very easy, but it wasn't bad. Apparently, even on the hard difficulty, this boss is still not very difficult, and it's probably because of that light speed dash exploit. Maybe it needs a bit more health or something, because this fight is over really, really quickly. After you beat these bosses, I think these are the Guardians, you will get a portal gear, but we'll get to those later on. The second boss was Tower, I think, and this was a bit more strategic, as it has this like rotor or something on it, and if you don't move in time when you're attacking it, it will come down and strike Sonic. It was pretty good, but during my experience, things like the parry didn't really come in handy too much, and it was pretty easy too, just like Ninja. After that boss was done, it dropped another portal gear, which would unlock the next cyberspace level. So to summarize, I like the combat, but so far the bosses and the enemies are a bit too easy and exploitable to really show the true value of this combat system. So now I'm going to cover what is probably going to be the weaker part of this game. Now, whether these will improve later in the game, I'm not sure, but I played 2 cyberspace levels, the Green Hill level, which is right behind you as the game starts, and I also played Sky Sanctuary, which once I beat it, it gave me a key so I could collect a Chaos Emerald, which then opened up that open zone even more. The most important thing to me about Cyberspace when I first went into these was the gameplay, just like, the open zone. But it just feels so off. It's really difficult to explain it, but for whatever reason, Sonic just doesn't feel as good as he does in the open zone, which is surprising because Sonic plays very well in the open zone, like borderline one of the best Sonic has ever felt in 3D good. But these cyberspace levels are just a bit underwhelming so far. I am trying to be positive about them. I did go in with an open mind, and to be honest, they're not terrible. There is definitely enjoyment to be had from them. For example, becoming familiar with the level layouts and then going back into them to try and speedrun. That felt pretty rewarding, but so far they are just very short and the challenges within them are very easy as well. The most surprising thing about beating all those challenges was finding all the red rings. I found them all without even trying to find them. They're like literally in plain sight. On a positive note, they still play a bit better than Forces, and the music in them was fantastic, but honestly I did expect that. Especially Sky Sanctuary, and the visuals were really nice as well. So overall, they're short, they don't play as well as the open zone, but they do give you a traditional Sonic experience, which isn't inherently a bad thing, because it gives you this new open world formula, but it also gives you something you're familiar with. It's just, I feel if the gameplay was better in Cyberspace, and maybe the level design wasn't as basic as it is, they would be a much more enjoyable experience. Sonic also feels really slow as well, but I'm not sure if later on in the game you can speed him up in these levels. Again, this was only a few cyberspace stages. There is still an entire game full of these stages that we have not seen yet. So I don't hate cyberspace. I did have some fun with them, but they didn't do much for me personally, at least in comparison to the open zone. So after my time with this game, playing it firsthand and getting in as much as I possibly could, I am pleased to say that, yeah, I really like this game. I think it's pretty fantastic so far. The open zone from what I played is genuinely thrilling. The vibe and the mystery of it and the atmosphere of this game is captured very nicely. The most important aspect for me when I went in was of course the gameplay, and to me this is the best Sonic has felt to control in such a long time, and it works excellent in the big open spaces. It's great to be able to use the drop dash in 3D and it having actual use, especially on slopes. Obviously, there is a bit of conflict with the gameplay because, you know, one part of this gameplay is excellent, but the other not so much. The combat, while it's pretty easy so far, it works. It feels polished and there is definitely some depth to it. This game seems to have a lot of content and the narrative so far seems to be pretty good. Obviously, I did mention cyberspace being kind of mid right now, but I did have some fun with it. And I don't think it's terrible at all. It's just, so far, it's nowhere near as good as the content around it. Despite the very obvious pop-in and draw distance issues, I had a relatively bug-free experience with Sonic Frontiers. So this game so far seems to be pretty polished. So yeah, I liked this game. It's not perfect, but you can tell they've really tried with it. And I'm pretty confident it'll turn out a great, or at the very least, a fine Sonic experience. I would probably rate the game so far maybe like a low 8 to near a 9 or something like that. But that's just from this demo. That rating could crash right down once we've seen the whole thing. But again, I have confidence in this game. If you have any questions about the game, then let me know and I'll try and answer them. I did try and get everything down in this video, but there is probably some stuff I missed. Anyway, that's it from me then. Thanks for watching and take care.